The late afternoon sun dipped over the row of small houses lining Magnolia Street, casting elongated shadows across the sidewalk. A gentle breeze stirred the summer air, carrying the mingled aromas of freshly cut grass and the lingering sweetness of honeysuckle from the neighbor's fence. It was the kind of sleepy suburban neighborhood where everyone seemed to know everyone else, and where the sound of a lawnmower in the distance was as common as the chatter of children's voices after school. Each house had its own personality, some with hanging flower baskets bursting with colorful blooms, others with tidy yards and carefully trimmed hedges that displayed a well-kept charm. Along this sidewalk padded a large, muscular pit bull named Copper, his sturdy legs moving in a steady, unhurried rhythm. At first glance, Copper was undeniably striking. He had a broad chest, a well-defined stance, and a glossy coat that glowed with a subtle bronze tint in the sunlight, which had inspired his name. Yet those who truly knew him recognized he was every bit as gentle as he was strong. He trotted along, tongue lolling, tail swaying lazily behind him. By his side walked Marie, a warm-hearted woman in her mid-30s, who had adopted Copper from a local rescue 2 years ago. Marie understood that many people carried preconceived notions about pit bulls, and she relished showing the world that Copper was, in fact, one of the gentlest dogs one could ever hope to meet. As they continued their walk, the quiet hum of neighborhood life provided a comforting soundtrack. A car ambled past, and in the distance, the faint squeals of children could be heard as they splashed in a backyard inflatable pool. Butterflies danced over a bed of impatiens near the curb. Copper's ears twitched at every small noise, the buzz of a cicada, the rustle of a squirrel scurrying up a tree, and Marie smiled down at him. She knew from experience that a dog's world was shaped as much by sound and scent as by sight. And Copper had a particularly keen nose. It was that nose which prompted him to pause and raise his head. Nostrils flaring, his strong body went momentarily still, the gentle swish of his tail replaced by a sudden air of alertness. Marie felt the tug of his leash as he sniffed the breeze, his attention drawn to something she couldn't see. "What is it, buddy?" she asked softly. Scanning the immediate area, the street looked the same as it always did, cars parked in driveways. The Henderson kids' bikes tossed on the lawn across the way. A bright pink flamingo stuck in the White family's garden. Nothing unusual there, but Copper remained transfixed, as though he'd picked up an unusual note in the daily symphony of scents. He let out a soft whine, an inquisitive sound. Marie leaned down and gave his broad head a gentle rub. "You're picking up something, aren't you?" she murmured. The pit bull's ears flicked toward her voice, but he kept sniffing, his nose raised to the air. Then, with a little huff, he started forward again, guiding Marie off their usual route and toward the end of the block. She allowed him to lead, curious about what might be sparking his interest. Their walk continued past Mrs. Delgado's pastel pink house, where wind chimes tinkled cheerily from the front porch. A small gate led to her backyard, and as they passed it, Copper slowed, nostrils widening again. Marie glanced around, searching for any immediate sign of trouble, perhaps a rabbit or stray cat. But she saw only the closed gate. Copper paused, gave a short, sharp sniff near the base of the fence, then moved on. They made a slow circuit of the neighborhood, Copper's ears flicking constantly, the leash taut as he pressed forward. Marie noted that his usual calm trot had shifted into a more deliberate pace, each step carrying a fresh wave of curiosity or concern. She'd never seen him so intent. Sometimes, Copper would double back to re-sniff an area, as though verifying a clue. It was almost like watching a detective piece together fragments of a mystery. And in a sense, that was exactly what was happening, only Copper's mystery was invisible to Marie. Whatever he sensed, it clearly mattered to him. They turned a corner that led into a narrower back alley, lined with tall fences and an occasional recycling bin. This area was less manicured and had a faintly disheveled, abandoned air. One or two cats dashed out of sight as they appeared, scrambling under a gap in a fence. Copper's posture grew more alert, his nostrils flaring dramatically now, drawing in the scents that hung in the cool, slightly musty air. The breeze had quieted, leaving the alley heavy with the lingering smells of garbage, soil, and damp concrete. Marie glanced around. "All right, buddy," she said, raising an eyebrow. I'm trusting you here." She'd grown accustomed to the times Copper's instincts guided him to do something unexpected, like the day he'd alerted her to the neighbor's cat stuck on a garage roof. Or the time he'd insisted on leading her around the far side of the block, only for them to discover a lost toddler who had wandered away from his front yard. But this was different. Copper's behavior was intense, as though the scent trail he had picked up was urgent. They pressed deeper into the alley, the tall fences on either side casting long, thin shadows. Despite the warm weather, Marie felt a subtle chill. It was quieter here, the bustle of the neighborhood more distant. Copper slowed and began sniffing a particular spot next to a tipped-over garbage bin. His tail wagged in a measured arc, not frantic, but determined, like he was definitely onto something. Marie leaned down and gave him space to investigate. Sure enough, there were a few small paw prints in the dust, tiny prints belonging to some petite canine. "Looks like somebody's missing their little dog," Marie murmured. The footprints led off behind a row of garbage cans, then veered toward the gate of a neighboring yard. As they followed the faint tracks, Copper's tail picked up speed. He gently nosed the ground, pausing every few feet to raise his snout and sniff the air, as if verifying he was on the right path. Although Pitbulls often had a reputation for being tough or territorial, Copper was a soft-hearted detective on a new mission. They emerged from the alley to a slightly busier street, where the whir of an air conditioner and the hum of a passing car punctuated the quiet. A short distance away was the Clemens family's yard. Marie recognized the tall hedge that bordered their property and the child-sized basketball hoop leaning against the fence. Copper turned his head in that direction, ears pricking, and set off at a brisk pace. The yard was currently deserted, the gate closed. Marie tried to piece together the clues: a little dog, lost or wandering, footprints in the alley leading this way. She recalled the neighbor mentioning a small Yorkshire Terrier that had a habit of slipping under fences. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized there were a few families around who owned small dogs. And it could be any of them. As they approached the Clemens gate, Copper rose onto his hind legs, pressing his front paws against the wooden slats. With his snout poking through a slight gap, he let out a low whine. Marie could see the yard beyond, a broad patch of grass, a sandbox scattered with toys, and a few lawn chairs. But no little dog. Puzzled, she gave Copper's neck a gentle rub. "Is someone in there, buddy?" she asked. In response, he lowered himself back down and sniffed along the fence, searching for a weak spot. They continued around the perimeter, weaving between bushes and the side of the house, until they reached the adjacent yard. The fence was lower here, and through a knot in the wood, Marie glimpsed movement, something small and quick, darting out of sight. Copper tensed, letting out a soft bark that was more of a muffled woof, as though he didn't want to scare whatever was inside. Marie peered over the fence. There, near a cluster of overturned flower pots, was a tiny, trembling form with wide eyes, a small, beige-colored chihuahua. Its ears were flattened against its skull, and it looked disoriented, staring back at Marie and Copper as if trying to decide whether to run or cower. Marie's heart clenched. She recognized this dog. It belonged to a neighbor named Mrs. Chu, who lived 2 blocks over. She'd sometimes seen the little dog, named Pico, wandering near the sidewalk, but always tethered or closely watched. This was definitely not a dog that roamed freely. "Oh, you poor thing," Marie whispered, glancing at Copper, who was entirely focused on Pico. He let out another soft whine, tail wagging carefully. Marie knew that to someone unfamiliar with pit bulls, a large, muscular dog might look terrifying. But from her vantage point, she could see the kindness in Copper's big eyes. He wanted to help, not frighten. Pico darted behind the flower pots, then back out again, clearly torn between curiosity and fear. Marie knelt, speaking in a soothing voice. "Hey, little one, it's okay. We won't hurt you." She reached over the fence as far as she could, but it was still a stretch. The dog took one hesitant step forward, then froze. He looked exhausted, like he'd been running for hours. The yard's gate was locked from the inside, preventing an easy approach. Thinking fast, Marie looped Copper's leash around the fence post, making sure he wouldn't wander off. "Stay here, buddy," she murmured, giving him a reassuring pat. Copper blinked and sat down, quietly panting. Then she tried the latch on the fence from her side. but it wouldn't budge. Determined, Marie sighed and decided to knock on the house door. Maybe the occupant could let her in to rescue the dog. She circled around to the front yard and rang the doorbell. No answer. The windows looked dark, and there were no cars in the driveway. The occupant must have been away. Checking the time, Marie realized it was nearing dinner. Maybe they wouldn't be back for hours. Back at the fence, Copper watched the trembling Chihuahua with unwavering attention. Marie regarded the situation. She didn't want to scare the little dog further by climbing the fence unexpectedly. But leaving it alone might mean it would run off again. She pulled out her phone, hoping she could call Mrs. Chu. Unfortunately, she didn't have her number. She considered calling a local animal control service, but that might take time. Also, if the dog got spooked and bolted before they arrived, it would be lost again. As Marie debated her next move, she realized that Copper might be key. The big Pitbull had a calming effect on many dogs, despite the stereotype. He exuded a quiet confidence that could reassure animals more easily than a nervous human. Marie untied his leash from the fence and led him around to a small gate between the properties. If she could coax Pico to approach Copper, perhaps the Chihuahua would realize they meant no harm and come closer. Or at least let them guide him to safety. "I'm going to need you to be extra gentle, buddy," Marie whispered, crouching down to Copper's level. The dog looked at her, head tilted, as though understanding every word. This little one is scared out of his mind. She rubbed the Pitbull's ears, then gently pushed the gate. It was locked as well, but the boards were spaced just enough that Copper could press his nose through. Pico stood on the other side, quivering. Copper let out a low, friendly whine, the same sound he made when he wanted to greet a dog at the park. He didn't bark or make any sudden movements. Instead, he sniffed the air between the fence boards, sending out silent signals of peaceful intent. At first, Pico slunk back, ready to flee, but Copper just kept wagging his tail softly, making little huffing noises. After several moments, Pico's body language changed, his ears pricked slightly, and he took one cautious step forward. Marie watched with bated breath. She knew dogs often have their own language, one that humans can only partially interpret. Copper's posture was calm and open, his tail moving slowly, side to side, in an inviting gesture. The Chihuahua, though still trembling, began inching closer, curiosity overtaking fear. It sniffed the gap in the boards, then took another step, until its tiny nose almost touched Copper's. Marie bit her lip, trying not to move or make noise that would spook Pico. Copper remained entirely still, occasionally blinking and panting softly. Then Pico crept close enough that his whiskers brushed Copper's muzzle. They exchanged a delicate sniff. Copper's tail wagged a bit more enthusiastically for a second, and Pico, clearly picking up the friendly vibe, let out a hesitant little yip, as though asking if it was safe. This was the moment. Gently, Marie called out, "Hey there, Pico, we're friends. Want to come with us?" She was rewarded with a slight tilt of the Chihuahua's head, followed by a careful approach to the fence. Now that Pico had calmed down slightly, Marie considered whether she might lift him over. The boards were still somewhat tall, but if Pico would allow her to pick him up, she could scoop him over carefully. Holding her breath, Marie unlatched Copper's leash from his collar and looped it through the gap, creating a makeshift slip lead on the other side. She dangled the open loop near the ground, coaxing Pico to step through. Copper seemed to understand the plan. He remained absolutely still, focusing on the little dog. Surprisingly, Pico, emboldened by Copper's presence, inched forward. His nose brushed the loop of the leash, and his front paws accidentally slipped into it. Marie, moving with deliberate gentleness, tugged the loop just enough to hold Pico without startling him. "Got you," she whispered. Now that the Chihuahua was on a lead, she could guide him toward a small space at the corner of the fence where a loose board provided a gap big enough for a small dog. If Pico cooperated, she could coax him out. Copper stood by, wagging his tail in encouragement. Pico squirmed for a moment, but Marie's calm reassurance, along with Copper's unwavering presence, seemed to soothe him. She guided him slowly, inch by inch, until she could see Pico's nose emerge from the fence gap. With a careful but firm pull, she managed to slide him through. The tiny dog came free into her arms, letting out a plaintive yelp at the unexpected movement. "Oh, sweetie, it's okay," Marie crooned, pressing him gently against her chest. She felt the rapid flutter of Pico's heartbeat through his thin frame. The Chihuahua was soaking wet from having tramped through the neighborhood sprinklers, and his paws were caked in dirt. She took a moment to examine him. He appeared unharmed, just frightened and a bit disheveled. No ID tags on his collar. Perhaps Mrs. Chu had taken them off for a bath and forgotten to replace them. Copper, seeing that Pico was now safe, pressed in for a sniff. The smaller dog tensed at first, but Copper gently licked the Chihuahua's head. That simple, reassuring gesture broke the last of Pico's tension. He sagged in Marie's arms, as if realizing he was no longer alone or lost. Marie chuckled softly. "We've got you, Pico. Let's get you home." With Pico secure, Marie turned to Copper, who was watching intently, still in a posture of quiet readiness. "Good job, detective," she said, awarding him a playful scratch behind the ears. He grinned, chest puffing out slightly in that proud way dogs can have after accomplishing a mission. She clipped his leash back onto his collar, and the trio retraced their steps down the alley and back toward the main street. Now that the immediate crisis was over, Marie's mind bubbled with questions about Pico's escape. How far had he wandered? How long had he been missing? Had Mrs. Chu even realized he was gone? Copper plodded alongside her, unhurried once more, ears swiveling at the familiar sounds of suburban life. Occasionally, he'd glance up at Pico, as though checking to ensure the little dog was still okay. Pico simply peered back with wide, trusting eyes, apparently warmed by the big dog's quiet confidence. As they approached Mrs. Chu's block, the sun had lowered further, bathing the street in a wash of gold. A few neighbors were out on their porches, watching children zip around on scooters. One neighbor, Mr. Berman, waved from his lawn. "Evening, Marie," he called. "I see you've got an extra passenger." He chuckled, clearly referring to the small dog in Marie's arms. She waved back with a friendly smile, too occupied to explain the full story right then. At last, they reached Mrs. Chu's modest single-story home, painted a cheerful yellow, with potted plants lining the front porch. Marie noticed the front door was open. Soft light glowed from inside, and she could see someone's silhouette moving about anxiously. When she reached the porch, she heard a worried voice calling, "Pico, Pico," reassured that Mrs. Chu was indeed searching frantically. Marie stepped up to the open doorway. Copper waited patiently behind her, tail wagging slightly. A petite woman with graying hair rushed to the threshold. "Have you seen?" She froze mid-sentence, her eyes locking onto the little dog cradled in Marie's arms. "Pico. Oh, my goodness, Pico." Without hesitation, she reached for him, voice trembling with relief. Pico wriggled, letting out a yip of recognition. Mrs. Chu hugged him tightly, tears welling up as she scolded him gently in a mix of relief and exasperation. "How did you? Oh, you naughty boy. I was so worried." Marie watched the reunion with a fond smile. For all the anxious wandering Pico had done, it took only a moment for the dog to look utterly content in his owner's arms. Nuzzling her face, Mrs. Chu turned to Marie, blinking away tears. "Thank you so much. Where did you find him?" "I've been searching the whole block, calling his name." She paused, taking in the sight of Copper. A flicker of concern flashed across her expression. Likely that reflexive wariness some have upon seeing a Pitbull. But her relief overruled any hesitation. Did your dog help?" Marie nodded. "He caught Pico's scent, and we followed it through the alleys. Found him hiding in someone's backyard. Scared and alone, Copper led me right to him." She gave the Pitbull's side an affectionate pat. "He's a pretty good sleuth." Mrs. Chu swallowed hard, looking from Marie to Copper, gratitude softening her features. "I've always heard Pitbulls were dangerous. But this," her voice trailed off, emotion welling up. She reached out a tentative hand to Copper, who leaned forward to sniff politely, then allowed her to stroke his head. "Thank you," she repeated, this time addressing Copper directly. The dog wagged his tail, as though accepting her thanks with modest grace. For a few moments, they all stood there, soaking in the relief. Mrs. Chu peppered Pico with affectionate scoldings and gentle kisses, while occasionally shaking her head at Copper's calm presence. Finally, she composed herself enough to invite Marie in. "Please, come inside. I'd love to give you something for your trouble, some lemonade." "Maybe?" Marie shook her head politely. "We appreciate the offer, but we're all right. I just wanted to make sure Pico got home safe. That's more than enough reward." She gave Pico a friendly pat on the head, and the little dog licked her fingers shyly, as if to say thanks in his own way. Mrs. Chu opened the screen door wider. "Well, at least let me give Copper a treat." Copper's ears perked up at the word. "I keep some dog biscuits for Pico. I'm sure he'd be willing to share." She disappeared inside for a moment and returned with a small biscuit, shaped like a bone, which she offered to Copper. He accepted it delicately, chewing with measured enjoyment. The scene was warm and quietly triumphant, a testament to the gentle nature that lurked beneath Copper's strong exterior. "It was my pleasure," Marie told Mrs. Chu as they said their goodbyes. "I'm just glad we found Pico before it got dark." Mrs. Chu nodded, hugging Pico close. "Me too. I can't thank you enough." Then her gaze wandered to Copper once more, eyes brimming with amazement and gratitude. "You really are a hero," she whispered, half to the dog, half to herself. Copper, of course, just gave a little sneeze, as though unimpressed by all the fuss. But Marie knew better. She could sense the pride in the way he walked as they headed off the porch and back onto the sidewalk. He glanced up at her, big, soft eyes brimming with the quiet joy of a job well done. They made their way home, the final stretch lit by the warm glow of street lamps. The once bustling neighborhood had calmed, with only a few porch lights shining in the twilight. Fireflies blinked lazily above the lawns, and the cicadas' hum provided a gentle soundtrack to the close of another summer day. At their front door, Marie gave Copper a thorough once-over, checking for any burrs or scratches he might have picked up while navigating alleys and fences. Finding nothing, she rubbed his broad head. "You did amazing today," she said, her voice full of admiration. "You know that, right?" Copper responded by leaning his weight into her leg in that affectionate canine gesture that said 100 things at once: gratitude, trust, happiness. Inside, she refilled Copper's water bowl, and he lapped at it noisily, clearly thirsty from their extended walk. Then, with a hearty yawn, he padded over to his favorite spot by the window, where a plush dog bed awaited him. He circled once, twice, then settled down with a contented sigh, resting his chin on his paws. Marie settled herself on the couch. Phone in hand, she couldn't resist taking a quick snapshot of Copper's serene figure. Posting it online with a short caption about his heroic deed might help shift someone's perspective on pitbulls, or at least remind them that beneath a strong exterior can lie a heart as gentle as any. As the night deepened, and stars appeared in the sky, Marie thought about how this simple walk had become a small but profound adventure. Copper had used his sharp senses and gentle nature to help a frightened little dog find its way home. A fleeting, yet meaningful, connection had formed between Copper, Pico, and Mrs. Chu. It was a reminder of how easily neighbors' lives could intersect in unexpected moments, and how kindness, in any form, could bridge gaps. And though Copper would never boast about it, he was a dog. After all, Marie felt a quiet glow of pride for her companion. Once again, he had shown the neighborhood and her what it truly meant to be brave, caring, and reliable. It had been a good day, Marie decided, one worth remembering. And as the moon rose high and the hush of evening enveloped the house, Copper slept soundly, secure in the knowledge that he had done his part, continuing the slow but vital work of challenging fears and misconceptions, one wagging tail at a time. Early the next morning, a sliver of soft sunlight pierced the curtains in Marie's living room. Dust motes drifted lazily in that hazy glow, creating a gentle, dream-like atmosphere. On the floor near the window, Copper stretched out his front legs, arching his muscular back until he could let out a long, satisfied yawn. The events of the previous day were still fresh in Marie's mind, the urgency in Copper's behavior, the relief on Mrs. Chu's face, and the quiet, trusting acceptance from that lost chihuahua named Pico. Despite the tension of the rescue, it had all turned out so well. Marie walked in from the kitchen, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. She smiled when she spotted Copper already awake, his brown eyes bright with morning alertness. "Good morning, hero," she teased, setting her mug on a small side table. Copper's ears perked at the word, hero, although he certainly had no notion of what that meant in human terms. Still, her tone was affectionate, so he responded with a slow, thumping wag of his tail. As she crouched down to rub his wide head, she remembered how calm he'd been with Pico, so gentle, so patient. After years of hearing misguided opinions about pit bulls, she'd grown accustomed to defending Copper's breed whenever someone eyed him with caution or crossed the street. But to see him perform such a selfless act of guidance the day before had stirred her pride more than any words could describe. They shared a quiet moment, Marie feeling the sturdy warmth of Copper against her hand. The hush of the morning was interrupted only by the distant hum of a lawnmower from a neighbor's yard. Summer cicadas had already started their soft chattering, and the scent of dewy grass drifted in through the partially opened window. Marie stood, stretching. "Want to head out for our morning walk?" she asked. Copper rose instantly, an eager glint in his eyes. His routine was as much a joy for him as it was for her, a way to greet the day. Nose first, exploring the neighborhood's ever-changing tapestry of smells. Within minutes, Marie had changed into her sneakers and clipped Copper into a sturdy harness. They stepped onto the porch, blinking at the gentle light that painted the world in pastel hues of gold and lavender. The street looked freshly washed by dawn's early glow. Cars dotted the curbs, and a few neighbors were just beginning to stir. Marie caught sight of Mr. Berman a few houses down, already tending to his rose bushes, while the Henderson kids played a half-hearted game of catch on their lawn. She waved, feeling that sense of easy familiarity she loved about this place. Copper led the way, sniffing at every curb and lamppost. Occasionally, he would pause to glance back at Marie, as though double-checking that she was still there. She found herself reflecting on how different her life would be without him. She'd adopted him from a shelter during a time in her life marked by loneliness, recently moved. Starting a new job, unsure of how to make friends in a close-knit town. Copper had been the solution to a problem she hadn't even known she had. His presence had bolstered her confidence, pulled her out of her shell. They passed Mrs. Delgado's yard and her hummingbird feeders. The bright red feeders swayed gently in the morning breeze, and a flash of emerald green zipped through the air as a hummingbird shot away from them. Copper tilted his head at the rapid flutter of wings, but then turned to sniff a patch of marigolds along the fence. Up ahead, a familiar figure appeared on the sidewalk, Mrs. Chu, accompanied by none other than Pico. The tiny chihuahua looked much more sprightly than he had the previous day, trotting along with a little bounce in his step. He wore a bright blue harness that seemed brand new, likely a precaution after his escapade. Mrs. Chu looked over, and a broad smile spread across her face. She waved them over, and Marie obliged, guiding Copper so they could meet at the corner. "Well, I'll be," Mrs. Chu exclaimed. Her eyes danced with gratitude as she gazed at Copper. "Look who it is, Pico, our guardian angel from yesterday." Pico's ears perked at the sound of Copper's panting. He took a hesitant step forward, then recognized the big dog he'd encountered in his moment of fear. Without much prompting, he edged closer, nose quivering. Marie and Mrs. Chu exchanged pleasantries, though it was clear that Mrs. Chu's main focus was on Copper. She bent down, extending the back of her hand for him to sniff. "You have no idea how thankful I am," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "I was so worried about Pico. The thought of him lost in alleys or stuck in someone's yard." She trailed off, swallowing. Marie laid a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I'm just glad Copper picked up his scent in time," she replied. "He seems to have a real talent for finding lost dogs." Mrs. Chu nodded. "Pico's harness is new. I'm determined to make sure he can't slip out anymore. I've also got tags ready for him. Never again will I make the mistake of leaving him untagged. Even for a day." She gave a sheepish laugh, then looked at Pico, who was sniffing Copper's massive front paw. For his part, Copper remained calm, allowing the tiny dog to investigate him. After a moment, Pico gave a tiny wag of his tail, as though acknowledging an unexpected friend. The two dogs stood there, a striking contrast in size but united by their gentle demeanors. Passers-by who might have paused to look at the imposing Pitbull and the minuscule Chihuahua side by side would see a living portrait of how appearances can be deceiving. Pico retreated toward Mrs. Chu's legs, as though to confirm her presence, and then he bravely returned to sniff Copper's muzzle. The Pitbull lowered his head, exuding a patient serenity that was disarming in its warmth. Mrs. Chu let out a delighted chuckle. "He's definitely remembering what happened," she said. It's almost like he's saying thank you. They parted ways after a few more minutes of conversation, promising to meet again soon. Marie and Copper continued their walk, the neighborhood now awake with the routines of daily life. As they strolled, Marie noted how people reacted differently to Copper. Most neighbors who already knew him smiled and waved. A few new faces turned slightly wary, though, crossing the street with a forced nod. It was a common enough occurrence. Some folks simply held onto negative stereotypes about pit bulls. But Marie refused to let that sour her day. She knew that every time Copper quietly demonstrated his gentle spirit, he was making a tiny dent in that wall of prejudice. By the time they looped back home, the sun had risen higher, and a balmy heat began to settle over the neighborhood. Marie stepped inside, unclipped Copper's harness, and made a casual plan for the day. She had a few errands to run, but the afternoon was wide open. Perhaps they could visit the local dog park. Copper enjoyed the open space, and it would be another chance for him to socialize. She thought of how many times they'd gone, how often other dog owners had eyed him nervously at first, only to laugh in relief when they saw he was more interested in sniffing the grass and greeting new canine friends than in causing any trouble. She sat at her kitchen table, sipping the last of her coffee. Copper lay at her feet, contentedly gnawing on a chew toy shaped like a donut. Their morning together felt peaceful, the memory of Pico's rescue still imparting a warm glow of satisfaction. Shortly after noon, Marie grabbed Copper's leash again, deciding a trip to the dog park would be a perfect way to make use of the sunny weather. She also tucked a small bag of dog treats into her pocket, just in case. The dog park was located a few blocks away, nestled beside a strip of woods. It offered a spacious fenced area where dogs of all shapes and sizes could run freely. On weekends, it was bustling. On a weekday, she expected a more moderate crowd. As they approached, the telltale symphony of barks and yips reached her ears. Beyond the chain-link fence, she saw a variety of dogs darting about, shepherd mixes, retrievers, and a handful of smaller breeds chasing each other near the benches. Copper trotted excitedly beside her, ears up, tail waving in broad strokes. He always enjoyed exploring new scents and meeting new friends. They entered the double-gated enclosure, Marie taking care to secure the latch behind them. A nearby posted sign read the usual rules: leash off inside, supervise your dog, clean up after them, etc. She removed Copper's leash, and he glanced at her as if seeking permission, then galloped forward in playful glee. A couple of dogs came bounding over to greet him, tails high. Copper's posture remained relaxed, an occasional play bow and gentle sniff. Marie felt a stir of pride again, watching how seamlessly he fit in with the others. A few owners were scattered around the perimeter, some engrossed in conversation, others keeping an eye on their pets. Marie found a shaded spot near a tree and settled onto a bench. She nodded politely to a middle-aged man seated there, a poodle darting at his feet. He nodded back, looking at Copper with subdued curiosity. Marie's experience told her he was probably waiting to see how things would go. Copper's introduction to the poodle went smoothly. The poodle flounced over, sniffed Copper's side, and they engaged in a quick wagging of tails ritual before parting. The man on the bench relaxed a little. "Beautiful dog," he remarked eventually, though there was still a hint of caution in his tone. "Thank you," Marie replied with a friendly smile. "He's a pit bull, but he's as gentle as can be. I adopted him a while back. He has a knack for finding lost dogs. Actually," she added with a light laugh, "thinking of Pico's rescue." "Really?" The man looked intrigued. "That's surprising. Not that I have anything against pit bulls," he added hastily, "but they do get a reputation." Marie nodded. "Yeah, the reputation can be pretty unfair. Some of the sweetest dogs I've known have been pit bulls." She pointed out Copper, who was now ambling alongside a frisky beagle, sniffing the fence where, presumably, countless dogs had left their mark. "It's all in how you raise them, you know?" The man nodded, glancing back at his poodle. "My sister has a rescue, too, a lab mix. Sometimes I think the dogs who've had a rough start just appreciate a good home all the more." Marie smiled in agreement, watching as Copper broke into a short sprint, chasing the beagle in a friendly game of tag. Their footfalls kicked up a small cloud of dust, and the sound of happy panting reached her ears. She felt a small surge of gratitude that places like this dog park existed. A spot where dogs could just be dogs. Unburdened by human prejudice. Suddenly, a bark from the far side of the enclosure drew attention. A woman stood with her Cocker Spaniel, who seemed uneasy as a much larger German Shepherd approached. The woman looked around with that uncertain expression new visitors sometimes wore, as if she wasn't entirely sure her dog would get along with the rest. Copper's ears perked, and he paused his game with the beagle to watch. After a moment, curiosity propelled him forward. Marie tensed slightly, while she knew Copper was gentle. She was also aware that new arrivals often felt apprehensive about pit bulls. She rose from the bench, prepared to intercept or reassure the woman. But as soon as Copper neared, the Cocker Spaniel sniffed his leg, tail wagging uncertainly. Copper responded with a playful wag of his own, a low pant that signaled friendly intent. The woman visibly relaxed. "Oh, hi," she said, looking at Marie. "I didn't realize there would be so many bigger dogs here." She gave a self-conscious chuckle. "I'm new in town. Clementine, my Cocker Spaniel, has never been great with large dogs. But I'm trying to get her socialized." Marie walked over, speaking softly. "Copper is gentle, I promise. He's used to playing with dogs of all sizes. If Clementine seems stressed, just give them space." Clementine sniffed at Copper's nose, then wagged her stubby little tail. Copper, reading her body language, dropped into a relaxed stance. Marie recognized that as his go-to posture for greeting smaller, anxious dogs. Little by little, Clementine stopped trembling and circled around him, as if verifying that yes, he was indeed safe. The woman laughed with relief. "Oh, thank goodness. I've been so nervous about bringing her here. She had a bad experience once with a big dog, nothing major. Just a scare, but I didn't want that to hold us back forever." Marie gave a reassuring nod. "I understand. My boy's had to face a lot of assumptions, too, but he's a real sweetheart." As if to prove her point, Copper gave Clementine a gentle canine kiss, a small lick on the muzzle. The Cocker Spaniel's eyes widened for a moment, and then she relaxed fully, returning the gesture in a brief, timid motion. The woman smiled, shoulders loosening. "I'm Brianna, by the way," she said, offering her hand to Marie. "Marie," she replied, shaking it warmly. "And this is Copper." They chatted for a bit, discussing the local vet clinics, best pet supply stores, and quiet streets where one could take a leisurely dog walk. Clementine, now more confident, trotted off to investigate a Shih Tzu on the other side of the park, while Copper ambled back over to greet the German Shepherd who had piqued the Spaniel's anxiety in the first place. Moments like these felt good to Marie, evidence of positive encounters that chipped away at fear and stigma. Eventually, the midday sun grew hot, and dogs began to pant in earnest. Many owners drifted toward the shade, offering water to their pets from collapsible bowls. Copper slurped noisily from the bowl Marie provided, droplets splashing onto the dusty ground. His pink tongue lolled, and she patted him affectionately. "Let's head home in a bit, buddy," she suggested, glancing at the time on her phone. They had spent a solid hour there, more than enough for a decent romp. Before they left, Brianna approached them with Clementine in tow. The Cocker Spaniel actually seemed reluctant to leave Copper's side. "Thanks for being so friendly," Brianna said, scratching Copper behind his ears. "My impression of pit bulls just took a huge turn for the better." Marie felt her heart warm at that. "I'm glad to hear it. Really, I am." They said their goodbyes and headed out of the park, stepping back onto the sidewalk under a blazing sky. Copper still had a lively bounce in his gait, even after running around for so long. Marie decided to take a slow route home, letting him cool down in the shade of trees wherever possible. On the way, they passed a small corner store that sold ice cream and cold drinks. A sign outside read, "Dogs Welcome," in bright letters. Marie smiled. It was one of the few spots in town that not only allowed dogs but encouraged owners to bring them inside for a quick treat. The promise of air conditioning was tempting, and she stepped through the door, feeling the cold blast on her sweaty skin. A teenage clerk stood behind the register, grinning at them. "Hey, Copper," he called. "I remember you guys from last time. He's such a cool dog." The store had been one of Copper's earliest socialization stops, and he was well known for sitting politely while Marie paid for items. They made their way to a refrigerated section, where Marie grabbed a bottle of chilled water. Copper sat at her side, tail sweeping the floor with patient excitement. Nearby, a small freezer contained an assortment of dog-friendly frozen treats. Marie decided to indulge Copper with an icy peanut butter snack. She felt he deserved it after his good behavior and the previous day's heroic deed. They checked out, the teenage clerk smiling as Copper licked his lips in anticipation. Outside again, Marie opened the treat, holding it for Copper to nibble at. He took measured licks, savoring the chilly sweetness. She chuckled, watching him enjoy it. He'd always had a distinct preference for peanut butter anything. Strolling home, they cut through a small community park. A playground sat at one end. Slides and swings currently unoccupied. The midday heat seemed to have driven most families indoors. Beneath a large oak tree, a lone figure rested on a bench, Harvey, a retiree from down the street. Marie had chatted with him occasionally, but she recalled he'd once made an offhand comment about pit bulls that suggested unease. As they passed by, Harvey shifted, spotting Copper immediately. His expression was guarded, though not unfriendly. Marie nodded a greeting, pausing to see if he might want to exchange a few words. "Hot day, isn't it?" he remarked, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "Sure is," Marie agreed, stepping into the shade. "We're just headed back. Copper's all tired out from the dog park." Harvey glanced at Copper, who stood calmly, panting from the heat. "So, that dog, he's a pit, right?" His tone was cautious, as though he was testing the waters. Marie nodded. "Yes, he is. He's a sweet boy, though, I promise. We actually found a lost chihuahua yesterday." Copper led us right to him. Harvey looked mildly surprised. A pit bull rescued a chihuahua. "Huh? Now that's something you don't hear every day." He leaned back, fanning himself with his handkerchief. "I guess I might have had the wrong idea about them. My cousin was bitten by a pit bull once, years ago, and well. You know how people talk." Marie offered a sympathetic nod. "I'm sorry your cousin went through that. Any dog can bite under the wrong circumstances. Though, it's often about the individual dog and situation, not just the breed. Copper here has never hurt anyone." Harvey lowered his eyes to Copper's calm demeanor, observing the dog's easy posture. Copper didn't bark or strain at the leash. Instead, he gazed at Harvey with mild curiosity, letting out a short, polite sniff in the man's direction. After a moment, Harvey reached into his pocket and pulled out a small dog biscuit. He hesitated, then looked at Marie. "Is it okay if I offer him this?" Marie felt a flash of relief. "Sure," she replied, stepping closer so Copper could see what was being offered. Harvey extended his hand, palm open, the biscuit resting there. Copper sniffed, his tail giving a few measured wags, and then gently picked up the treat. He crunched it with obvious delight. Harvey chuckled, visibly relaxing. "He's got a soft mouth," he said, as if surprised. "That's Copper," Marie confirmed, gentle by nature. The corners of Harvey's eyes crinkled in a smile. "You might just change an old man's mind about these dogs," he said quietly. "I appreciate you taking the time to talk." Marie smiled. "Anytime. We all have our experiences. But it's never too late to learn something new." She and Copper continued on their way, the conversation replaying in her mind. It filled her with quiet satisfaction to see how, little by little, Copper's presence was bridging gaps. She might never convert every skeptic in town, but every moment of understanding counted. They arrived home to the cool refuge of air conditioning. Copper padded to his water bowl, lapping noisily. Marie took off her shoes and collapsed onto the couch, checking her phone for messages. A text from a neighborhood group chat caught her eye. Someone had posted about hearing rumors of an off-leash dog wandering near the old community center. She tapped the message open. The user wrote, "Saw a small black terrier running by itself near the old gym. Seemed scared, couldn't get close. Anyone missing a dog?" Marie frowned. Another lost dog? Memories of Pico's fearful eyes flashed through her mind. She glanced at Copper, who was now settling onto the living room rug. "Well, buddy," she mused out loud, "looks like our detective work might not be over." The day wore on, with no further updates in the group chat about the mystery terrier's whereabouts. Marie cooked a light lunch, scrolled through social media, answered emails, and occasionally checked her phone for news. She considered heading out for a drive to see if she could spot the dog. But the temperature outside had soared into the high 90s. If the terrier was indeed wandering around, it might seek shade. making it harder to find. Finally, as dusk approached and the heat began to wane, Marie decided to hop in her car and scout the area near the old community center. She brought Copper along, if there was a frightened dog out there. His nose might once again prove invaluable. They pulled into the cracked, overgrown parking lot, the once busy community center looming in the background. Windows shuttered, graffiti marking some walls. The building had been closed for renovations that never materialized, leaving it in a kind of dusty limbo. Copper hopped out of the car, nose immediately twitching as he absorbed the scents carried by the evening air. The lot was mostly empty, save for a few stray cats that darted behind dumpsters. Marie locked her car and let Copper lead, though she kept a firm grip on his leash. Feral cats were one thing, she didn't want him chasing them. Even out of playful curiosity, they circled the perimeter of the parking lot, moving toward the backside of the structure, where a cluster of oak trees provided dense shade. The place was eerily quiet, only a faint echo of distant traffic broke the silence. Occasional bursts of wind rattled the leaves overhead. Copper sniffed the ground near a row of broken concrete barriers. Marie peered around, noting patches of trash and old cardboard boxes that might be used as makeshift shelters by stray animals. She was starting to think the tip about a lost terrier might have been a false alarm, some dog that had already been picked up by its owner, or simply a stray cat mistaken for a dog. But then Copper froze, tail sticking straight out. Marie followed his gaze. Underneath a sagging chain link fence, something small and dark moved, just a fraction. She squinted, stepping a bit closer. Sure enough, she glimpsed a small black shape, pressed against the fence. It could have been a dog, or a cat, or even a raccoon, but Copper's intense focus suggested it was likely canine. She advanced carefully, not wanting to startle the animal into bolting. Copper took slow steps, quiet and deliberate, head low. As they drew nearer, the shape resolved into a scruffy black terrier with nervous eyes. Its fur was patchy, matted in places, and it looked painfully thin. The dog pinned itself against the fence, as though hoping to disappear into the chain links. Marie's heart clenched. The poor creature appeared terrified, possibly having been on its own for days. "Hey, little one," she called softly, stopping a few yards away. Copper also halted, sensing the dog's fear. She sank to a crouch, lowering herself to seem less threatening. "It's okay, we won't hurt you." The terrier let out a short, sharp bark that trembled in the quiet air. Its eyes darted between Marie and Copper, uncertain which was the bigger threat. Copper stayed still, neither barking nor pulling on the leash. The terrier's bony sides rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths, as though it might sprint off at any moment. But the fence behind it was reinforced, leaving no clear path of escape. Marie inched forward, quietly praising Copper for his calm behavior. Then she spoke to the terrier again, her voice soft and reassuring. She kept her body language loose, offering the back of her hand for the dog to sniff. But the little thing just cowered, letting out a low whine. Reminded of Pico's scenario, Marie considered letting Copper take the lead once more. If the terrier felt threatened by humans, maybe he'd respond better to another dog's signals. She slowly guided Copper a step or two forward. He didn't lunge or bark, just stood in a relaxed stance, sniffing the air. The terrier shifted, ears flicking. It let out another uncertain yip. But Copper remained unflappable. With hesitant curiosity, the terrier lifted its muzzle, catching Copper's scent. Then, in a tiny, trembling motion, it licked its lips and sniffed the air again. Marie took this as a good sign. Dogs often lick their lips as a way of showing submission or nervousness, a sign they aren't looking to fight. She ventured another few inches. "You're okay, sweetheart," she murmured. "We'll get you some food. Some water." Copper, as if sensing the next step, lowered himself into a lying position. This was the move Marie had seen him do with timid dogs before, making his tall body less imposing. He stretched out, muzzle resting between his front paws, tail thumping lightly on the ground. It was an unmistakable posture of peace. The terrier blinked, head cocking to the side. For a few seconds, neither dog moved. A cautious truce, fragile as glass, hung in the air. Finally, the terrier shuffled forward just enough for its nose to meet Copper's. They exchanged a swift sniff, and the terrier bolted back half a foot, tail tucked, Copper stayed perfectly still. "Good boy, Copper," Marie breathed, glancing around for something she could use to lure the terrier closer. She had a few dog treats in her pocket. She carefully pulled one out, holding it up for the terrier to see, then placed it on the ground in front of her. The terrier's eyes flicked to the treat, ears pricked with desperate hunger. But it remained tense. Minutes ticked by. The terrier's wariness warred with its obvious need for food and safety. Copper remained on the ground, exuding calm. Marie kept her voice steady, coaxing the dog in as soothing a tone as she could muster. Finally, the terrier took a single step forward, then another. It paused, glancing at Copper, who still lay flat, tail sweeping a small semicircle in the dirt. Gaining confidence, the terrier crept up to the treat, sniffed, and gobbled it down so quickly Marie worried it might choke. But the dog swallowed hard, then flicked its tongue, searching for more. Marie placed another treat a bit closer to herself. The terrier eyed her, uncertain, but hunger won out. It advanced, trembling. This time, when it seized the treat, it lingered for just a moment. Looking at Copper, the big Pitbull responded with a soft huff. Wagging his tail again, the terrier gave a tentative sniff to Copper's paw, then hopped back. Progress, Marie thought, hope swelling in her chest. If she could just get a slip lead on this little one. Maybe she could bring it to a vet or a shelter to check for a microchip. Though, judging by its condition, it might be a stray. Still, she refused to give up on the possibility that someone was missing this dog. If not, she'd find it a good home somehow. She slipped a spare leash from her bag, forming a loose loop. Slowly, she placed a third treat on the ground, closer to herself. While preparing the leash in her other hand, Copper watched intently, occasionally shifting his gaze to Marie, as if to ask for instructions. The terrier inched closer, eyes never leaving the treat. By the time it reached the snack, it was within arm's length of Marie. Her heart pounded. She knew she had one shot at this without scaring it off completely. With slow, deliberate movements, she extended the loop. The terrier flinched but then resumed sniffing. She slipped the loop gently over its head. It froze, wide-eyed, but the immediate reward of another treat and Copper's calm presence seemed to keep it from bolting. Marie softly tightened the loop, ensuring it couldn't slip free. "Shush, it's okay," she cooed, one hand holding the leash, the other inching forward to stroke the terrier's scruffy neck. The dog tensed at her touch, but didn't lunge away. Instead, it let out a small, pitiful whine, as though resigned to whatever fate had in store. "We've got you," she whispered. "You're safe now." Copper rose to a seated position, still leaving a respectful distance. The terrier, feeling the tension of the lead, tried a half-hearted pull back, then gave up, settling into a low crouch. Marie reached into her bag and brought out a small bottle of water. She poured a bit into a collapsible bowl she kept for Copper, nudging it toward the terrier. The dog hesitated, then lapped at the water eagerly, draining it in seconds. Marie cast a relieved smile at Copper. He seemed to sense they were at a critical juncture. His posture relaxed but attentive. She patted his side, grateful. Without his reassuring presence, she doubted the terrier would have allowed her so close. After letting the dog finish the water, Marie carefully checked for tags. Nothing on the worn collar, just a name, Shadow, inked in faded marker. "Shadow, huh?" she said gently, testing the name. The dog's ears twitched slightly. It might or might not recognize it. The next step was coaxing Shadow to the car. That prospect made her nervous. Sometimes, once dogs realized they were being taken away from their territory, they panicked. But the community center lot was deserted, and the drive wasn't far. She kept the slip lead secure, stood slowly, and gave a gentle tug. Shadow balked, whining in alarm. Copper moved a bit closer, giving the terrier a brief sniff as if to say, "Come on, follow us." Shadow took a tentative step, then another, limping slightly on a hind leg Marie hadn't realized was injured. Her heart sank at the sight. The dog was in need of medical attention. She offered a few more quiet words of reassurance, sprinkling in a treat or two. Little by little, they managed to guide Shadow around the building and back to the car. Loading a frightened dog into a vehicle was tricky. Marie set Copper in the backseat first, trusting him to remain calm and not scare Shadow further. Then she gently lifted the terrier, Shadow initially thrashed, but Copper's presence seemed to quell the panic. Once on the seat, Shadow froze, staring at the Pitbull as though uncertain whether to trust or flee. But the door was closed. The car sealed. There was nowhere to flee. Marie slipped into the driver's seat. Exhaling slowly, she glanced back at the two dogs, Copper, calm as a saint, lying down with his head on his paws, Shadow, scrunched up against the door, eyes darting but no longer trying to escape. She turned the key, and the engine sputtered to life. "Let's get you checked out, Shadow," she murmured. The drive to the nearest animal hospital felt longer than it was. Tension heavy in the car. Shadow whimpered occasionally, his stress palpable. Copper gave a low, comforting rumble in his throat, a sound Marie recognized as his gentle way of offering reassurance. When they reached a stoplight, she turned briefly, extending a hand toward the terrier. Shadow shrank back, then slowly relaxed, as though making peace with this uncertain new reality. They arrived at the clinic just as twilight sank into the sky, painting it in soft oranges and purples. Marie parked and let out a breath, mentally gearing up for the next phase, explaining the situation to the clinic staff, hoping they had room to help, and paying for any immediate care Shadow might need. She wasn't wealthy by any measure, but she couldn't leave this dog out on the street. She leashed Copper, then carefully ushered both dogs inside. The reception area was fairly quiet. A single cat in a carrier meowed softly, and an older couple sat waiting with a terrier mix. The receptionist glanced up, eyes widening slightly at the sight of a bedraggled black dog and a Pitbull side by side. Marie approached, describing how she had found Shadow near the abandoned community center. Within minutes, a vet tech appeared, guiding them to an exam room. Shadow trembled at every new scent and sound, but didn't resist too much. Copper's calm presence continued to act like a bomb, so Marie requested that he stay in the room rather than waiting in the lobby. The tech agreed, remarking on how unusual it was to see such a composed Pitbull in a stressful environment. Marie offered a small, proud smile. Soon, the veterinarian arrived, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. She knelt and extended a hand to Shadow. Talking softly, the little terrier gave a half-hearted growl, then let her examine the injured paw. With patient thoroughness, the vet checked for a microchip, none found. She administered a quick vaccine, cleaned Shadow's wound, and gave some antibiotic ointment. "Looks like he's been on his own for a while," the vet said quietly. "Thin, dehydrated, and that paw might be from stepping on glass or something sharp. Nothing broken, though. That's a relief." Marie nodded, stroking Copper's back as she spoke. "Is he stable enough for me to take him to the shelter? Or maybe home with me for now? I don't want to stress him out more than necessary." The vet frowned sympathetically. "We can keep him overnight if you'd like, just to observe, but if he's eating and drinking, and you're able to monitor him, home might be less scary than the shelter right now, especially if your Pitbull is giving him comfort." Marie glanced at Shadow. The dog looked utterly exhausted, eyes half-lidded, leaning into the corner of the exam table. If taking him home was an option, that might indeed be the best approach. "I think I'll do that," she decided, as long as there's no risk to either dog. The vet checked them both over once more, satisfied that Copper wasn't a threat. Marie paid the bill, slightly higher than she anticipated, but still manageable. She promised to return for a follow-up in a few days if Shadow hadn't improved. Back in the car, with night fully settled in, Marie set her phone's GPS to guide her home. Shadow still trembled, but the presence of Copper seemed to ease some of the fear. Marie drove carefully, glancing in the rearview mirror to see Shadow drifting in and out of a restless doze. When they finally arrived at her house, she led the dogs inside. Copper loped in as usual, tail wagging, while Shadow crept forward, each step deliberate. The terrier sniffed the air, taking in the unfamiliar environment. He stuck close to the door, clearly uncertain whether this was a safe place. Marie spread a few blankets in the corner, set out food and water bowls, and tried to make the space inviting. "This is home, Shadow," she said gently, feeling a pang of emotion at how quickly her life had shifted from a quiet routine to harboring a new, vulnerable soul. Copper patted over, sniffing the blankets. Shadow eyed him, then ventured a timid step forward. Marie sat down on the floor, letting the dogs approach each other at their own pace. Copper offered a soft grunt, settling into a sphinx-like pose. Shadow remained cautious but seemed marginally more relaxed than before. Eventually, he lowered his belly to the floor, nibbling at a treat Marie placed nearby. The house was quiet except for the ticking of a clock and the soft hum of the air conditioner. Marie let out a long breath, her mind racing with possibilities. Tomorrow, she'd post on social media, alert the shelters, and talk to neighbors. Maybe someone was missing a dog named Shadow. If not, she'd do whatever it took to find him a stable forever home. In a single day, her peaceful afternoon had transformed into a rescue mission. And once again, Copper had proven integral in reassuring a lost, frightened dog. Gazing at the two canines, a proud Pitbull with a heart far kinder than his fierce visage implied, and a scrappy terrier who was slowly discovering that not all humans meant harm, Marie felt a swell of gratitude. She reached over, ruffling Copper's ears. "Thank you, my friend," she whispered. The Pitbull wagged his tail, his eyes warm and soft, as though reminding her that this was simply what he did. He helped. He guided. He reassured. By the time the clock struck midnight, Shadow had eaten a small meal and drunk a good amount of water. He slept fitfully, occasionally twitching with nightmares. Copper dozed nearby, not too close to crowd him, but near enough to offer a silent vigil. Marie finally turned off the lights. Heading to her bedroom, she paused in the doorway, glancing back at the shadowy forms of the dogs, one large and strong, the other small and wounded, but both alive with the promise of a new day. Her heart brimmed with a sense of purpose. It wasn't easy, taking in a lost, frightened animal, but it felt like the natural next step in the gentle mission she and Copper had undertaken, showing the world, one dog at a time, that kindness and compassion knew no breed boundaries.